Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our virtual town hall with secular elected officials in Arizona. My name is Sarah Levin, and I am with the Center for Free Thought Equality, the advocacy and political arm of the American Humanist Association. The Center for Free Thought Equality advocates for humanist values and separation of religion and government on Capitol Hill, and they have a full-time lobbyist, Rachel Deitch, who is also tuning in tonight. Hi, Rachel. I also wear another hat as the program coordinator for Jews for Secular Democracy, which is a proud sponsor of tonight's event as well. I want to extend a special thanks to another sponsor, the Secular Coalition for Arizona, for making tonight possible. In a minute, you will hear from their board chair, Zenaida Quintana, followed by their Director of Government Affairs, Tori Roberg, who we truly could not have done this without. I'd also like to recognize and give special thanks to our sponsors from Allied Faith Communities, the Arizona Faith Network, and Arizona Jews for Justice. The non-religious community continues to face stigma and discrimination, which is a barrier to increasing our representation in public office. Having the support of faith allies is critical to ensure that we are included, respected, and adequately represented in our government, which should reflect the diversity and pluralism of Arizona and our country. And finally, I'd like to thank the elected officials joining us tonight: House Minority Co-Whip Representative Athena Salman, Senator Juan Mendez, Osborne School Board Member Katie Pates, and Sierra Vista Council Member Carolyn Humphrey. Thank you for leading by example and helping to eliminate the stigma of being an openly non-religious elected official. You're an inspiration to the secular community and a sign of hope that if we keep fighting for our right to inclusion and representation, we will prevail. We are so grateful to you for taking the time to share your experiences, update us on the most pressing issues of the day, and taking questions from the folks tuning in. Speaking of Q&A, please note that we will be taking questions live toward the end of this event after getting through questions that were submitted ahead of time. Please use the chat function to ask questions, and we will do our very best to make sure they are answered as time allows. When asking your question, please do indicate whether you are an Arizona resident. We absolutely welcome and are thrilled to have out-of-staters tonight and look forward to hearing from you as well. However, we would like to prioritize questions from locals if possible. And with that, I am pleased to turn it over to Zenaida Quintana, the board chair of our partner and co-sponsor of the Secular Coalition for Arizona.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Tori, for organizing this, and also our sponsors, our co-sponsors, for joining us in this event, and of course our elected officials, Athena Salman, Juan Mendez, Katie Pates, and of course Carolyn Humphrey. Full disclosure, Carolyn Humphrey was a former secretary of the Secular Coalition for Arizona, so it's a real thrill to see her again in her new capacity, and well, not so new, but she's been at it for a while as a councilwoman in Sierra Vista. Secular Coalition for Arizona has been around for 10 years, and sadly, we continue to be unique in the country. It's the only state-based organization that advocates full-time for church-state separation at our state houses and at with various public officials around the state. We have managed to prosper in a hostile environment with our state, and it occurs to me that with our elected officials, it should not be an act of courage to live in a country that has a freedom of conscience enshrined in its constitution. It should not be an act of courage to openly embrace secularity or non-theism. But in point of fact, it has been exactly that. And our 4 elected officials that we have with us today have demonstrated it, as you've mentioned, Sarah. And so it gives me great pleasure to acknowledge their pioneering contribution to our movement and to encourage them and all of us to continue fighting for this basic liberty that our country has had such a struggle trying to live up to. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us today.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Tori Roberg. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the Secular Coalition for Arizona, and I am going to get us started today. So let me start first by introducing our panelists. I'm going to start with Representative Athena Salman. Representative Athena Salman is born and raised in Arizona to an immigrant family from Mexico, Germany, and Palestine. Her early gratification for rights we often take for granted inspires her defense of the most vulnerable, including forcing the prisons to supply feminine hygiene products to incarcerated women by sparking national outrage, unapologetically standing with educators during the Red for Ed movement, having benefited from a public education herself, and now fighting for the health, safety, and lives of frontline workers and our communities during the COVID-19 pandemic. Representative Salman is currently the House Democratic Whip, and she is a good friend to Secular AZ. We can always count on her to lead on many issues, especially ones regarding separation of church and state at the state capitol. So welcome, Representative Salman. Where are you at? See, there she is. I don't know how y'all. I don't know how you have your setup. If you have it, you probably want it on speaker view. So I'll introduce you, and then if you want to say a few words, Representative Salman, and then I'm going to introduce our next panelist.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, Tori. And, thank you to all the organizations locally and nationally who helped convene this. I am really excited to be a part of this panel discussion tonight. So, and I think this is very timely given the current federal administration and how we see states like Arizona follow in lockstep. So yeah, thank you.
Great. Our next panelist is Senator Juan Mendez. Senator Mendez is a first-generation Chicano from Arizona. He received an AA from Phoenix College and BA from ASU. Before public office, he managed AZ Community Voicemail, a nonprofit where he connected thousands of people living in poverty, transition, and homelessness to jobs, housing, information, and hope. Juan also served on the Tempe Community Council as a planner, advocate, and resource to improve the funding and policies affecting human services locally. Most recently, Senator Mendez was a co-instructor at Phoenix College. And a few words from the Secular Coalition. He is also the founder of the country's only secular studies program for legislators. This is a lunch discussion group that he started a few years ago that encourages open dialogue and good conversation on some controversial issues amongst lawmakers at the state capitol to build camaraderie and to understand where people are coming from. In 2013, he made national news as the first lawmaker in the country to give a secular invocation. And Secular AZ can always count on him to do the right thing and to go above and beyond for secular government. So welcome, Senator Mendez.
Thanks. I'm really grateful to be here. I recognize a lot of faces and names, so I know this will be a really interesting conversation. I can't wait for some of your questions, and I know all the speakers are going to have a lot of knowledge and information to share with you all, so can't wait to get started.
Awesome. I would just like to add before introducing the other two esteemed panelists today that both Representative Sallman and Senator Mendez, they consistently received the highest scores on our secular scorecard. So Representative Sallman's in the House, she always gets the high score, and Senator Mendez in the Senate gets the high score. Additionally, they are the only open atheists at the state capitol. So appreciate y'all very much. The next person I'd like to introduce is school board member Katie Pates. Katie is a teacher with 12 years of experience in elementary classrooms. She is a school board member for the Osborne School District. She ran openly secular and has served since 2014. During her term, Katie served 2 years as board president. She passed updated non-discrimination policies to include sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. And I know for a fact she got an angry letter from the Alliance Defending Freedom. So good job, Katie. She has led the board in hiring a new superintendent, passing local bonds and overrides, including inclusive transgender policies, removing police from schools, and passing comprehensive trauma-informed healing care policies. She's also served on the City of Phoenix Traumatic Incident Ad Hoc Committee, created to extend services to families experiencing trauma. Katie Pates has also been a good friend to the secular movement in Arizona, from volunteering her time to help me create some amazing, some organizing against some bad bills at the state capitol, to speaking at our events and encouraging our members to run for office. Katie is truly a treasure. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you, Tori. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Secular community has been really supportive of me while in office, and I'm just really happy to see everyone's faces and just to share whatever I need to.
Thank you. And I would love to introduce my friend, Carolyn Humphrey, City Councilwoman from Sierra Vista, Arizona. Carolyn and her husband first came to Sierra Vista with the military in 2006, then made it their permanent home in 2008. Since then, Carolyn gave birth to 2 beautiful children, started and grew a successful dog grooming business where she is the owner and operator, and was elected to Sierra Vista City Council. Prior to running for public office, Carolyn was on the executive board of the Secular Coalition for Arizona, and she served as our secretary. She resigned from the board in order to run for public office, and we all cheered her on. In her 2 years on the Sierra Vista City Council, Carolyn has worked closely with the community, the school board, and the military leadership in Fort Huachuca, as well as interfacing with state and federal members. She also participates in events with the Arizona Cities and Towns and serves on the Military Communities Council for the National League of Cities. Carolyn is an active member of the Sierra Vista Chamber of Commerce and is a member of the Chamber's Rising Entrepreneurs and Professionals Committee and a board member of the Education Foundation of Sierra Vista. In 2019, Carolyn was awarded the Herald Review's Young Professional of the Year Award. And none of this surprises me because Carolyn is one of the hardest working, most giving people I know. When she spent her time with Secular Coalition, she's someone that we could always count on to help, to be there, to show up. So Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us today. And also, I just wanted to add that she is the highest ranking Republican atheist elected to public office in the country. And I just think that's awesome. Carolyn, you're a trailblazer. Welcome.
Thank you. That was news to me. And I don't want to say I would have changed my mind on being in this panel if I knew that was going to be a thing right before on the internet. I'm just saying, I really miss working with Secular. Resigning was one of the hardest things, and I think I might have cried in front of you guys. I don't know, but thank you for all your support, and I'm really honored to be included today.
Thank you so much for being here. So I've got some questions we're going to ask the panel, and then we're going to get into the audience questions, the ones that have been sent in ahead of time, as well as ones that come up during this chat today. So,
hey, Tori, I'm so sorry. Before you get started, I have to make a quick housekeeping announcement. Unfortunately, there is a technical glitch and the chat function is not available, and I'm very, very sorry about that. But if you've been frustrated trying to find it, don't worry, it is not just you. And so what we are going to do is offer 2 alternative options for asking questions. You can go to the Facebook Live event. You can find it by searching for Center for Free Thought Equality. That's Center for Free Thought Equality. And you can comment on the first thing you'll see at the top is the Facebook Live video, and you can put your questions in the comments. Another option, if you're not on Facebook or you'd like to ask the question anonymously, and a few of you have actually already figured this out and emailed me, I am going to send you all an email where you can just reply with your questions. And again, I'm sorry about that. So just Facebook, Center for Free Thought Equality, comment on the live video, or reply to the email that I'm about to send. Okay, go ahead, Tori. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. So let's start with, I'm going to start with you, Carolyn.
Okay.
What are your top priorities as an elected official, and what are you working on right now that you'd like your constituents to know about?
So my top priority right now is that the city services are maintained and we reopen them to the public in a safe manner. And that includes, we decided not to reopen today until June 15th. And I think that is a wise decision. The mayor says it's an abundance of caution. I think it's his way of saying we would rather be criticized for being overly cautious than look back and think we didn't do enough. And so that's right now, but as we move forward, and since I'm a new council member, this is probably why I'm just focused on budget planning, because we have so many unknowns going on with our budget right now. And I just want to make sure that we are spending responsibly and that we take into consideration the pandemic and all its effects it's going to have on our community.
Yeah, I know the pandemic is on everyone's minds right now. And so I'm going to send that question up to Senator Mendez to answer as well. If you want to address what your top priorities are right now and kind of what's going on at the legislature with COVID. And Representative Sallman, I'm coming to you next with the same question.
Yeah. So top priorities, it's a lot of stuff's kind of thrown out the window just because of, like how COVID-19's changed everything. But I mean, even before all this stuff, I still want to make sure that we don't make all of our inequalities worse. Because I mean, all COVID did is just show us that we've had this broken system for a long time. So I mean, for me, I feel like I'm still focusing on ending all the political and economic inequalities that so many of us have to work under. I got a lot of practical bills that, everybody's got a lot of focus on like bringing or attracting new jobs to Arizona, but there's so many people that are working jobs right now that what if we did something to make better jobs out of the jobs that we already had? And so I'm hoping I can frame some of my employment bills as COVID related, to help people economically. And then other than that, I mean, even before this, one of my biggest priorities was the environment and how we don't have any water here in Arizona. And just really quickly, like it's so bad. We have problems with water because we don't have any language that allows us to acknowledge water as its own entity with its own rights. And so the only way that we can talk about water is about using water. And so any water we have gets all used up. So those are some of my priorities. And obviously just making sure that, people can weather this coronavirus. So that's what I'm going to be looking forward to if we come back for a special session.
Great. Representative Sallman, a question for you if you want to address what you've been working on.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So it definitely has thrown a wrench into the year, but I just echoing on what Senator Mendez highlighted, the problems that people are experiencing accessing public benefits, state benefits, and support from their government were problems that already existed. And they're problems that have gone, at least in a state where we have had a conservative majority in the state legislature for virtually since the 1960s, give or take. What we have seen just in my 3.5 years of being in the legislature is defunding the general fund at the tune of $1 billion. And I'm talking only having been there for less than 4 years, while state agencies like the Department of Economic Security, like the Department for Child Safety, our public education system have just been starved for resources. So at the height of the recession in Arizona, I believe I'm thinking whether it's 18,000 or 28,000 Arizonans applied for unemployment. And as of this week, we have had over 525,000 unemployment claims. And we are only 2 months, 3 months into this pandemic. So a lot of the work that I have been doing and my colleagues over in the House, we've been working on is, being in constant communication with the department, trying to help get our constituents connected to public benefits, such as unemployment insurance, such as rental assistance and measures that are going to keep people in their homes, because the last thing we need right now is for people to lose shelter. And while we've been working on these things, we are preparing legislation to be introduced, hopefully during a special session, as a part of our COVID relief package for Arizona families. When the Republican majority called us back a week ago, we were hoping for the opportunity to work on COVID-19, because at this point, my view and my caucus's view, and I think I can speak for the Senate as well, is if we are not addressing the crisis both in the short term, but also thinking about long-term systems that are going to help Arizonans waiver this, then we are not really doing the people's work. Lastly, the other priority. So I'm also, in addition to being the Democratic whip, I'm also the ranking member on the House Elections Committee. And historically, vote by mail has not been a partisan issue in Arizona. In fact, right now we have all 15 county recorders, which are our election officers here in Arizona, for those of you who are kind of tuning in from out of state. And they all support having a universal vote by mail option for the pandemic, because we understand that we don't want another Wisconsin. We don't want people to not have an alternative option to going to vote in person and have polling places that are crowded where you can potentially, I mean, we saw 52 cases, at least 52 cases in Wisconsin where voters contracted and poll workers contracted COVID-19 while at the polls. So it already has 29 Democrats supporting in the House of Representatives. It has 13 Democrats supporting in the Senate. So I'm hopeful that, you know, as we wade through into the summer, and unfortunately we're not seeing a decline in Arizona in COVID cases, we're actually seeing a rise because the governor opened up the state too quickly. I'm hoping that we begin to see at the legislature level some bipartisan support for this proposal, because we know at the community level and historically this hasn't been a political issue, but unfortunately the president has made it a political issue. So therefore we see the legislature treating it as such.
Thank you so much for sharing that and your priorities. And I want to move to the school board level now with Ms. Pates. Katie, can you tell us a little bit about your priorities and what's happening in your school district right now?
Yeah, so well, when COVID happened, you know, a lot of our leaders, we went into triage mode. We wanted to just make sure that our kids had meals. And that was the first priority that happened and that we advocated for. And at the board level, I advocated that our meals were not just picked up, but that there was van service and that they were dropped off at locations. And that greatly increased that service to our kids. I think after that, you know, it's shifting into not as much triage, and it's more like, what is the long-term planning? And my priorities there have been, you know, that our schools, that we don't make decisions, like incredibly long-term decisions that have long-term effects on our community. Like one conversation I'm involved in right now is the talk about putting up glass partitions in our offices to protect the community and to protect our workers. And, you know, where I kind of sit on it is, well, let's look at the temporary measure, but let's not fully change the face of our schools, because that was an issue that we had settled before this had all happened. But it's just making sure that the community is heard. We have committees within our schools to help make these decisions. And we've advocated at the board level that community members are on those committees too. So many times in our systems, and we know this with being secular, that decisions are made and they serve the few. And that is usually what we're trying to undo in these systems. And if we're building new systems right now that didn't, we need to change how we include people in those decisions and have a real collaborative effort that involves and engages the community in a meaningful way, and also what the community is asking for or saying its needs are then incorporated into decisions that are made alongside what expert, you know, science-based, you know, how do you prevent disease from spreading, you know, recommendations as well. And so it's just making sure that while we do system, we don't commit the issues of the past that we've seen by just blocking out certain groups of people from those decisions. So kind of where our priorities are right now is making sure that the process is honorable for our kids.
Thank you for that very much. It sounds, and it's very interesting. I was taking some notes as the four of you were talking, and I heard some top priorities about water, public education, finding resources, keeping people in their homes, COVID relief, unemployment, voting rights, collaboration, making sure that kids are safe. And I just want to commend all of you for that, because I think oftentimes folks forget that just because that if you're secular, that you're going to somehow have some other agenda, some kind of secular agenda. And I didn't hear any of that in this. And the truth is that that's just not the case. And so I would love to hear more about some of your priorities and what you're working on. But I'm going to shift over to a specific COVID question, and I'm going to ask this either Representative Sallman or Senator Mendez, whichever one of you would like to take this. How do you feel that the state is responding to the COVID crisis? And specifically, do you feel that that the response is being driven by science and evidence? And could you explain more?
I'll let Representative Sallman go first if she'd like.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I think that there's a strong urge in my caucus to follow the data and evidence and science behind just every piece of the system that you can approach, whether it's the healthcare system. I talked about the state benefits that people are relying on right now, voting rights, and looking at the statistics and evidence regarding the safety and security, especially since Arizona is actually one of the longest running systems and one of the most effective systems for vote by mail in the country. It's something that Republicans passed in the 1990s. And so we have decades of experience and decades of really fine tuning that system. So, it's interesting because it depends on what level of government, and it depends on what political agenda is motivating the lawmaker, the elected official. In my chamber, in the House of Representatives, I'm just very disheartened to see just complete lack of regard for, I believe, human life, and the decisions that are being made and the things that are being blocked from what we're proposing, which is safeguards to people's health and safeguards to people's livelihoods, are just completely ignored. And there's a point where even though the facts are on our side, even though we're being driven by both science and evidence, there are too many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who they just don't make their decisions based on that. So I just continue to be baffled and disappointed. But I do think that one thing that always gives me encouragement and hope is that the public is paying attention. And when you see lawmakers who are clearly ignoring experts and not making decisions that are based in evidence and therefore in the best interest of their constituencies, I do think that trickles over into the accountability session, which is why we have elections. Like, elections is how you hold your lawmakers accountable. So that's what I'm seeing currently. If Senator Mendez wants to add anything else.
Yeah, so the Arizona State Legislature, right? I mean, it's currently controlled by the Republican Party, and the Republican Party wasn't using science and evidence before COVID-19. So I don't understand why this would push them to start using science. Nothing that the legislature has produced outside of what the Democrats were able to force onto them is, I mean, they're not doing anything to save lives, prepare us for having to hunker down for the next couple of months. All they're doing is just image control. They're just trying to make sure that they look good while we're literally trying to hold on to our lives. The legislature, we literally set aside money for housing assistance, and it's almost like they're trying not to spend it. And that really gets at the contradictions of like what the right is stuck with right now. Like their ideology prevents them from investing in state services, whether or not it means people are dying or not. They just don't want to spend money. They really don't even want the federal stimulus money that's coming our way unless they can use it to supplement budgets that were that took a hit because of COVID, like because of the shutdown. So I would say nothing's really working right now. I would frame the legislature's response as it's a mix between like, it looks like we're doing something, but really just falling with style. Or it's a lot like how like ostriches kind of like stick their heads in the ground when things are going wrong and they think that that's going to help them. So, I mean, I would say what we really need to be worried about is everybody should read this book about the Shock Doctrine. It's like disaster capitalism. If anybody's kind of heard of that kind of framing before. I've heard this whole, our COVID response be framed as like this was a fire drill and we failed it spectacularly. And so like this, but at the same time, I kind of want to see this as like, there's got to be a better word, but there's like an opportunity here I think it's up to us to say, or to start demanding that, like all this, like the COVID, the pandemic, all this changes everything, or that it should change everything. Because I think the worst thing to come from all this would be if everything just went back to normal when we were done.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I appreciate the perspectives and the your experiences there at the state Senate, the state House of Representatives, where a lot of big decisions are made. For those of you who aren't familiar as much with the House and Senate, the legislature is highly partisan. And so I would like to get some perspective moving down a little bit to our nonpartisan groups that actually don't, where party doesn't play as big of a role in decision making as, and so that would be our school boards and our city councils, which are all nonpartisan. And I would love to hear, Carolyn, if you want to go first, just how you feel that the city, your city, is responding to COVID. Is it science and evidence based? How are you feeling about what's going on and how decisions are being made?
I think I've had a very different experience than Athena and Johnny, but I understand why they are in a very partisan atmosphere, and I am not. It's not been like that down here. I feel like I haven't, and I'm sure there's I'm sure there's people in the community that would disagree, but I don't have a problem with the way I agreed with the extension that the governor, the extending the stay-at-home order, and I thought that was the right decision. And I don't have a problem with us on the city level now being able to decide how we're going to move forward, because I know everyone's situation is different. We in Sierra Vista, we're not opening our city facilities. Our city lobby is currently closed. You have to do things on the mail or over the phone or online, and that's going to stay in place until June 15th. And as we get to June 15th, we'll decide. But that comes from us staying in, not just following guidelines set forth by the health department and the CDC. That comes from us staying, not just myself, but the entire council and the mayor, staying in close contact with doctors in our community and hospital staff and professionals and Cochise County Health Department. And I know we are, and this is partially just luck because some different factors again in place, that we joke that we're put in the corner because we're so wild, Cochise County, but like we have been, as a community, I see that we've been taking it very seriously. The city and the mayor have been upfront with recommending not just hand washing, not just social distancing, but wearing masks. We don't recommend, we don't require people wear a mask, but we're recommending it very openly. And we're making sure people in the community have the encouragement to step up and take those precautions. And individuals can make those decisions. But the residents they've been doing a great job, I feel. And I think that's why we, in part, I know there's other factors, but I think that is why we do have a lower per capita than a lot of the other counties.
Thank you. School board member Pates, do you have anything to add from from what you're experiencing at the school board level on COVID and science and evidence-based
COVID,
response?
science, and evidence. It says my internet connection's stable. Hopefully you guys can hear me.
Okay.
I mean, I definitely would like to read the book, The Shock Doctrine, because I am seeing kind of in our discussions and our power struggles around this, like some interesting reasoning coming out that I do question the science behind it. I think at the school board level and at the school level, you know, we're working with children. And so we're really conscious of the decisions we're making, and the decisions we're making for safety. We want to make sure that they're done in a way that they don't re-traumatize our children who are also going through this collective trauma, as we all are now too. And so we're looking, so I think it's how we say the information, and you know, let's say that we recommend that, you know, all kids are wearing masks at schools and teachers are wearing masks at school. I do know from my mother, that's a respiratory therapist, that wearing masks, you know, at the hospital with kids can be traumatizing for them. And so we're trying to figure out, like, how do we be safe, scientifically safe, but then also keep their social emotional health in mind, and create resilience factors for them while they're going through this too, and building blocks so that they can gain resiliency through this as well. And so that's kind of where we're at. You know, I think we're trying to be science-based in understanding childhood development, and what do you share with children, you know, at a school level, and also the decisions you make and how you explain things, and making sure that our teachers and our staff members are trained in a way that is not going to, like I said, re-traumatize them pertaining to their development level. That's where we're at.
Thank you so much. Just different perspectives from different levels of government. It's very interesting, and I appreciate all of your leadership on that one. I do want to get into some questions on secularism and what it's like to be a secular elected official. So I'm just going to open this up, and whichever one of you wants to answer, feel free. The question is, how do you express your secular identity, and why is it important for you to be openly secular?
I'll go first really quick, if that's cool. So secular identity, right? It's, I guess in my experience, I feel like it's easy in, you know, the legislature, it's very partisan, so it's easy to get organized around political parties. But in my experience, I've seen political parties are more organized around power than any kind of like ideology or identity. And it's really, it's weird. Like I want to think of myself as an individual, but I'm not really there for just my own views. I mean, like, I'm supposed to be trying to bring in your views and concerns into the public policy process. So, I guess if anything, my identity is constantly pushing me to question just everything that's going on, like everybody's motivations, their intentions, and I guess like the fallout from what people are producing, like their ideas, and just, I guess, trying to make sure that that we're not pushing, you know, religiously preferenced legislation. And then sometimes I honestly believe, like, if I wasn't there with my like secular identity, there really wouldn't be anybody, I mean, really calling anything out. I mean, like, we can't really rely on like closet atheists or even just, you know, non-secular people to really, you know, connect the dots. I mean, like, I hope everyone's familiar with Project Blitz, but it was this, you know, like very Christian nationalist movement to undermine the separation of religion and government. And I feel like if I wasn't there, people would have just laughed it off as just, you know, like, those are just a bunch of non-related bills that have nothing to do with anything. But if you're there with a secularist identity, you see that all these little bills are chipping away at the separation of church and state. So you know, I mean, if I wasn't there, I feel like we wouldn't really be seeing what's happening as an organized attack on us.
Yeah, and to add to that, if you weren't there, I don't think that we would have made the movements that we've made for secular government over the last 10 years that we have. So I thank you very much for being there. Would anyone else like to address that, of how you express your secular identity and why it's important for you to be openly secular?
Okay, I'll just go. For me, I literally, and you've seen this, Tori, I literally wear my secularism on my sleeve because I have a tattoo. I don't know if you can see. It's a carbon atom, and I got it because I didn't have, when I admitted to myself that I didn't believe in a higher power, and it was me admitting it because I didn't for a long time, but I was in denial. And I was like, well, other people have these symbols they can wear. I don't have like a symbol to show what I'm so proud to be. And so that's why I ended up getting the tattoo. And I make no effort to hide that from anybody. Most of the time you can just see it. And I've had people ask me at Republican meetings, what's that about? And I just tell them, and I don't get like backlash, like you don't belong here or anything like that. But I think just being open and even when I wasn't elected, it's important that people know, because and I was at this point one time, the first time you meet someone that is like you and you're like, they admit, they tell you, oh, I'm secular or I'm atheist, I'm whatever. And you're like, oh, well, I like you and I respect you. So maybe it's okay for me to be that way. I think some people need that to feel better about, being more comfortable with themselves. And I'm seeing more and more in my particular neck of the desert that there is Republicans, and I've had Democrat friends always more comfortable with speaking against separation of church and state for a long time, or speaking out for separation of church and state. But now I'm seeing Republican friends openly speak out, like when the PPP money was given to those churches recently, and I had quite a few Republican friends like complaining about that openly online. And I thought that's really great that they're joining in on the criticism there, because that is wrong, and we need everyone to come out and speak against when something like that unconstitutional happens.
Thank you. Do any of you have any experience where your secular perspective has been somehow weaponized against you while you're serving in office in some way? And how did you address that?
I feel like the senator and House member might have a lot more, but I know for a fact you guys do. But the closest I came was a call to the public, because it's kind of, we're in a smaller community. There's only 45,000 people in Sierra Vista, and a more even limited number of very politically active people. So it's my views are not secret among them, and but they don't have the guts to say anything to my face. So one of them came to call to the public and read this statement where they were saying things about atheism, and even an atheist can recognize some, and looked right at me like trying to, I guess get a reaction out of me or something. But like that's the most that's happened. Nothing compared to the state leg, nothing compared to that. It hasn't been a lot.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. I think it's very interesting too to hear perspectives, because of, as you said, it seems like Democrats are very accepting, or more accepting, of separation of church and state. And as a Republican, an open atheist Republican, you really are a trailblazer figuring this out and helping to normalize this as far as keeping a secular government really has nothing to do with our own religious beliefs. We can come from many different religious beliefs, and we can all support separation of church and state. So appreciate that very much. I do want to ask one of the questions that came in before we got on here today. And Sarah, can you tell me how we're doing on time before I...
Absolutely, we have 15 minutes.
Okay. All right, so let's see. We had someone ask if you have run, and this is a question open to any of the panelists to answer. If you ran openly secular, what recommendations would you have for somebody who wants to run openly secular for a political office? Do you have any recommendations or experiences to share?
I guess one thing I would want to say just off the top of my head is I really liked what you had shared at the beginning, Tori, when you recognized that all of our priorities are everybody's priorities, and they're not necessarily like this, this atheist takeover of society. And so, I mean, it's one thing, you don't have to hide from anything. Like, you can tell everybody that you're, anytime you're filling out some kind of questionnaire or being interviewed, it's totally, you should be proud of who you are. You just don't let yourself get backed into a corner. I mean, like, you don't have to be defending yourself. You don't really ever have to really even be explaining yourself. Like, you get to frame it however you want. And the more you can include a story in it, the harder it is for anybody to personally attack you. And so, we get, it gets weaponized against us every once in a while, but you have to acknowledge it for it really to get any kind of legs and go for any kind of further. I mean, it's not unless somebody comes down to your specific race and spends thousands and thousands of dollars specifically against you to educate everybody about how you're an atheist and how that's going to hurt the community. I mean, I probably think they'd probably be doing you a favor with name ID versus that being any kind of way it's going to bring you down.
It's true.
Tori, I just want to add one other thing. I agree with everything Senator Mendez was talking about, especially with talking about issues that are important to all of us, regardless of your religious background. And I think, if you're an atheist, humanist, agnostic, openly secular, if you're running for office, one of the things that you might want to consider doing is, really thinking about what interfaith coalition do you have that can also help amplify your message or help demonstrate, almost being like your trusted messengers, because this is not only when you're running for office, but when in 2017, when the Speaker of the House ruled my prayer out of order because it didn't reference God or a higher power, and they didn't like me calling for members to be good to one another. That was the message of my prayer. It would have struck a different nerve if it was just atheists saying that this was wrong and condemning the action, right? And so this, again, whether you're governing and being targeted because of your disbelief in a higher power, or whether you're running for office, I think surrounding yourself, which is what fortunately there's an amazing interfaith network here in Arizona that recognizes we have a common value, which is the goodness of humanity. And, this is why we had the First Amendment. So tapping also into our belief and our responsibility to uphold the US Constitution. I think part of the reason that we were able to fight back so effectively is because there were people from all different walks of life coming together in unity, saying that, you can target an atheist today, but we're all one community. We're all in this together. And you target one of us, you're going after all of us.
Thank you. Okay. I'm waiting to see if anyone else wants to take that one up.
Well, Tori, I kind of want to add something a little bit. I mean, I hate to stereotype secular and atheist people, but a lot of the secular people I know sometimes know the Bible and religious issues more than religious people. And so you can use that as a skill to like communicate your message to this community that, you know, shouldn't be afraid of us. Like we have so much in common with them. And sometimes we know how to speak to them because we know what their fears are and what their concerns are. And so if you can frame your issues in a language that is susceptible to them, I mean, you could probably get pretty far. And they might not always see that, see you as, you know, like an other or against them if you can use their language in a way that connects your issues to their issues.
Okay,
Yeah.
and anyone else have something more to add? Go ahead, Katie.
Oh, no, I was just gonna like just concur. Any attention is good attention, so just own it. And also, yeah, the using religious language, I do that all the time. And it's tremendously helped me actually put forward secular views. And then after that, yeah, just pivot back to your message. So just own it and pivot back to your message and know that the attention.
All right. Sarah, I have one more question I can ask our panelists, unless you have a question there that came in. If you want to pick one, if there's one that came in while we were talking, so we can get one of those questions answered.
Oh, we have a bunch of questions that came in. Do you want me to throw you a few, or wait for you to ask the last one you have? However you want to do it.
The last one I was going to ask was on prayer in public government meetings, and I just was going to ask the panelists at the different levels of government if their city council, school board, legislature, if they open with prayer, and if so, what is their opinion and how do they handle that? So who would like to start? Carolyn, can we start with you?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we do. We open with an invocation. It normally is a prayer because we have a long list of, we have a joke like you can't throw a rock without hitting a church or a temple or a synagogue. Something religious in Sierra Vista because we have so many religions and diversity in that respect because we're a military town. And with that comes all those views and religions. And so we have this ongoing list of preachers and pastors, ministers, just waiting to give invocation. So my names never come up to give invocation. I've never had to like, I was thinking I would just not do it ever. And so when I got elected and I just told the city clerk, don't ever put me down for that. That's not really my thing. And she's like, okay. And funny thing is though, because of COVID, we don't have any of those people coming to the meetings to do the invocation, but it's still on the agenda for every meeting. And I made the mistake of not looking at the motion agenda until like right before the meeting. I was looking at the agenda, just not where it said Carolyn Humphrey will give the invocation. And I was like, okay, so I don't have anything prepared. I really quick got a hold of my assistant city manager. I'm like, you might not want the godless heathen doing this. So, because everyone at City Hall knows where I stand. They don't like expect me to go to national prayer breakfast or anything like that. And she was like, oh, it's okay, the mayor got it for you. But then she's like, you can give a moment of silence. And we've had that before, or a poem or something else if you want. And I thought, ooh, a poem. Because I remember Senator Mendez and Representative Sallman, when they gave these really beautiful invocations, and I'm not that good of a writer, but maybe if I could find something pre-written, I'd like to share that. So I blew it on my first opportunity to actually do that. But if it comes up again, I'll share it with you. I'll pay better attention. I'm not personally interested in removing that from our council meetings at this point in time. Would I rather it not be a part of a government at all? Yeah, of course. But I think it's part of our culture down here. I respect that it gives something to this community and all the people that stay involved with it. And it doesn't hurt me at all to just look down and think about whatever. Sometimes I like the words they're saying. I just don't think it's being heard by a higher power. So that's my personal feeling on it.
Very interesting. Thank you. How about at the Osborne School Board? Are there prayers in the school board?
No, and there wasn't when I got there. If they had them, they took them out a long time ago. We do open with the Pledge of Allegiance, and there's a very noticeable quieter under God moment in every meeting. So I think there's quite a few secular people in the crowd and on the board.
Okay. Senator Mendez?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about prayer at the Capitol. I mean, if I could add anything, I mean, I would love to think of it as some kind of like innocent thing. I mean, and there's a lot of times I can listen to it, or different people give the prayer, and they honestly say nothing. So sometimes it does sound like a very innocent thing because like there wasn't anything to read into. They were just, saying empty platitudes. So part of me wants to just dismiss it and be like, let them keep doing it. But it definitely plays into a larger like scheme. I mean, like it's definitely, it's not just like my same complaint of them trying to chip away at the separation of church and state. It's a mix between like proselytizing and just posturing. I mean, so many times people are using the prayer just to get up and say, that they are so awesome because of this, and other people are not as great as them. If it was an educational thing, I could support it a little bit more, but people are just using it to like claim points. And so in the long run, looking at like, if you just look back this last session, I would think it is hurting us in terms of keeping our society together versus bringing us together.
And Representative Sallman, I know earlier you had mentioned a little bit about the prayer that you gave a few years ago that was ruled out of order. Did you want to add anything more to that in regards to this question?
I think most everyone covered what I would say. I just I wish at the Capitol, instead of having the prayer, we had a respectful moment of silence. So for those who want to pray can pray, and then for those who just want a moment of reflection, I think that would be the most inclusive and the most secular way, or what Osborne School Board does, which is just get straight to business. So this was the first year that, so this is my 4th legislative session where the Republicans didn't specifically go after me after I gave a secular invocation or humanist invocation. Yeah, so I mean, that was nice of them, but the reality is it's still very much because of the makeup of the body and the lack of religious diversity in most governing bodies, right? It's still very much skewed to one religious belief. And I just think that's fundamentally unfair. So long-term, we should think about how we can equalize that. And I think the most effective way to do that is either a reflective moment of silence or just get straight to business after the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. Sarah, I'm bringing it back to you to ask a question from the audience.
Yes, and it is 11:50, so I'm hoping if the panelists consent, if we could ask maybe 2 or 3 questions and go just a few minutes over time, because I do want to make sure, and if not, that's fine, we'll get one last question in there. So I got a nod from the senator. Not from Representative.
It's only 8 o'clock here.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's 11 on the East Coast. So, okay, great. Thank you for being so generous with your time. So I'll go ahead. This is a question from Mary. She says, I belong to Arizona End of Life Options, a grassroots organization formed to help pass a medical aid in dying law in Arizona. We appreciate your dedication to this issue. I think she's speaking to the representative in the center here. I want to thank you both for sponsoring and co-sponsoring bills in previous years. And her question is, what can we do to help you bring this law over the finish line in 2021? For example, Secular Arizona is supporting this type of bill, but what other endorsements would you like to see for this new law?
I'm gonna take that question really quickly. Thanks for being organized around that issue. It's very important that I don't know. I say the most important thing, but something we could be doing right now that could help with traction on this bill is collecting stories. We used our secular studies this last session to bring in an end-of-life speaker, and we actually got some movement with some of the Republicans that come to our meetings where, you know, at the end of the presentation in confidence, the Republican came to us and told us that he supports this end-of-life option as legislation, and that he's just really sad that his party would never pick it up and let him do anything with it. And so, I mean, the easiest way for us to get to some of these people, because they're still real people, even if we don't agree with them, and, you know, they have totally different views than us, they're still regular people and can be moved like anybody else, but it just has to be the right story. And so sometimes some of the legislators we work with are so, you know, like, not trying to be a good legislator, where they won't talk to you unless you're from their district. So if you could start helping us collect stories about people and families whose lives would be totally different if we had this end-of-life option, and then we could start connecting those stories with the specific legislators that are problems for us. There's a lot of like grassroots work that we could be doing. I mean, not everything has to be fought at the Capitol. There's so much more like easier pressure points that can be manipulated with, you know, on a personal one-on-one basis, instead of just, you know, carrying a poster and yelling at people at the Capitol. Which, I mean, those are always important, but we can really make a lot of movement with this end-of-life issue, because it's an issue that comes with a lot of stories that are very, you know, heartbreaking and moving, and so, you know, we can pull at Republicans' heartstrings and probably get this moving. So the best thing would be to collect stories.
If I can just add one more thing, you know, it's interesting because we do have private conversations with some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle about this policy generally. So not even getting into the weeds of how it would work, because I know it looks different in the few states that do have this. And the sad reality for these conservatives is, even if they're inclined to support it, one of their top concerns is the fact that their base is so much dominated by religious forces. And the reason that I say this is a sad reality is because that is how effective the religious right and Christian nationalists have been, in that a policy that would improve the lives of so many people, part of our biggest barriers to getting it over the finish line is organized religion, and specifically the Catholic Church. It would be a major feat, but it would be a huge victory to get it out of either chamber of the legislature in 2021. But the sad reality is, you know, our governor, who is a Catholic, is also very much closely connected with several organized religious nonprofits like the Center for Arizona Policy and the Alliance to Defend Freedom, aka Alliance to Defend Hate. So organizations like that are the front groups for the religious right in blocking policies like the compassionate choices or end-of-life options that the viewer brought up. So, but I do think that it's important to get people of religious background as well to publicly endorse these ideas, and also, as Caroline mentioned earlier, you know, having Republicans willing to speak publicly about how they are a Republican and they think that this policy is in the best interest of the state of Arizona. I think those are additional ways we can make some movement in the right direction regarding this issue.
Okay, if no one else wants to jump in, I can go to the next question. So the next one, that was a very state level focused question. So I want to bring it back to the school board level. Richard was asking about Christian nationalists making inroads in local public school boards. And I think that's, want to throw that at school board member Katie Pates, but also if there's also implications at the state level in terms of curriculum and education. We also had a question about vouchers and public dollars going to private schools. So if we could maybe just address education at both the state and local level, both in terms of school boards and curriculum, and any other way that Christian nationalists have maybe made inroads or maybe have not. What's the landscape like?
Sure. I mean, I would say in Maricopa County, you know, the current superintendent that appoints that appoints school board members when there's an opening is, you know, a religious Republican, and he has made appointments of, you know, people that identify as Christian nationalist and have and also not even pro public education in some points, and so we're seeing it there. I'm not seeing it on my board, but you know, it does exist. I don't know if there's any more people, like it's growing more than it has been in the past. I think there's a lot more people that are secular or that are just not religious, Christian nationalist, religious right, are more interested in running for these offices. So you're seeing I'm seeing a different demographic, you know, choosing to run and winning. And so there's that. And I would say just the decisions that are made, you know, when the standards were redone under the old superintendent of at the state level, you know, there was a lot of controversy, and there was a lot of kind of obstruction of the committee and the democratic process that a lot of teachers and a lot of experts had engaged in when they updated the science standards. And then the old superintendent, you know, just wiped out every single mention of evolution, and then pushed in some kind of religious ideals in there as well. And so we've seen it there, and that's affected curriculum. And it also in our sex education policy, which once the new superintendent of public instruction, Kathy Hoffman, was elected, then there was a group that came forward and said, you know, current sex education policy doesn't include, it only includes heterosexual monogamous relationships, and that is the only thing that you can teach and add to curriculum, and then abstinence only, and that's it. And so really hand-tied, you know, elected official from having an inclusive policy. And so you really see it in those areas, you know, which is in the non-discrimination policy as well. So you see the discrimination there. I think it's more in the fabric of how we relate to each other, and then pushing religious ideals kind of in there. And it definitely is a threat too when you do pass progressive policy, you know, protecting gender expression, gender identity, sexual orientation, any of that. Like Tori mentioned, when I passed and when our board passed that update to that policy, the Alliance Defending Freedom / Hate showed up at our board meeting and you know, added public comment. It veiled that they would sue us in the future if we enter. And so, and we're a tiny district of 3,000 students, and where I've seen kind of the pushback towards secular ideas is really in just being trauma informed, and you know, maybe we have mindfulness language which then is interpreted as a religion, and it's usually the religious right that I see pushing back just on these more humanistic values, and it's not so much as I'm trying to keep people from you know, from expressing their freedom. It's more I'm trying to create safe spaces for our kids when they're entrusted to us by the community, and people with just real strict religious ideals just don't want to see those changes happen. So that's where I'm seeing it on the school board level.
Anyone else want to chime in on the topic of education?
I'll just add that you know, at the legislature, this is where we see the intersection of religious intolerance really marry with racial intolerance. The way that I view and the way I understand, I mean, in Arizona, we call them empowerment scholarship accounts. And the reason that we do them, even though they're technically school vouchers, is because in our Constitution, to actually give out a voucher would violate a provision in the Constitution that we have. So they're very good at coming up with workarounds so that they could violate our core constitutional values. But you know, the reality, nobody in this country is stopping anyone from removing their child from the public education system, the public school system, and putting that child into a religious or parochial school. The problem is that part of the organized effort by the religious right to really attack the integrity and the safeguards that are provided in the both our state constitution and our federal constitution is to erode that separation and divert whatever policies, divert whatever while you have into implicit endorsements of religion by government. So unfortunately, Arizona has a pretty large and active school voucher system. And essentially, it's just subsidizing a religious education. There are some instances where students are using it because of a disability and they can't get what they need, but by and far, it is a middle to upper income families who don't need tax support from the government to send their children to a private school that are utilizing these dollars. And I just think it's unfortunate because it has led to, in conjunction to the growth of charter schools. So you have like these privatized options growing at an exponential rate at the same time. Although vouchers are more explicitly religious, charters technically still have that firmer wall of separation between church and state. But you see the growth of privatization of public education at a time when they're, you know, post-civil rights movement, when a lot of white flight continues to happen from our public schools. In Arizona, I mean, we've been minority pupils in public education since 2012. And in that time period, you see the conservative lawmakers really accelerate and expand the school voucher program. So that I think that's just worth noting, because on the right, on the conservative religious right, they're very good at building coalition to get a shared goal through the finish line.
That is such a great segue. Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead, please. Someone else is going to jump in.
Just real quick, I wanted to also mention that the funneling of public dollars into private education isn't only in the voucher system. It's written into our Title II Act, our congressional, I think it's Title II Act. Osborne's in a unique situation where we have the most private schools within our boundaries in the Phoenix area. And because of that, a portion of our federal funds actually goes straight to private schools to support students that are in our boundaries, but don't go to our school. And the expansion of those dollars and the account has gone up, and the accountability of those dollars has gone down for private schools. And then another just current example is with the CARES Act funding that's going to come to schools. And I know about numbers, but Osborne is supposed to get $1.2 million, but private schools get their cut of that money. And once that happens, Osborne's only getting $700,000 of that CARES Act funding. So the funneling of public dollars into private schools is at all places in our policy and law, not just in the voucher system.
Thank you so much. I did not know that. Thank you for sharing. I wanted to use Representative Sallman's intersection comment to lead into this next question, which is from Evan. He said, can you speak to how your secular identity and values intersect with other issues people don't traditionally think of as secular issues? And so if there are other intersections like what you were mentioning, Representative, about privatizing education and racial disparities as well. If there are any other examples of that you all can share, that'd be great.
I think that the movement that's been happening my entire life, which is really sad when you think about it, but the movement to restrict female autonomy and women's right to just be full functioning people in our society is very much driven by the religious right. So much so, I mean, it's so fascinating. I hope everyone has watched the Netflix documentary called The Family. And there's another documentary by this amazing woman here locally that's available on Amazon Prime called Birthright, A War Story. So I really encourage viewers to watch both those documentaries to fully just begin to grasp how deeply embedded organized religion's attack is on women's rights. Even when, you know, when you look at the majority of Americans, like the majority of Americans support Roe v. Wade and don't think that the Supreme Court should overturn that. The majority of Americans think like your birth control should be free. You know, there's these items. The majority of Americans support the Equal Rights Amendment and equal pay for equal work, especially for, you know, when it's on the basis of gender. But time and time again, in the legislature, the organizations, the groups, the people that are fighting against these gender equality proposals the hardest are ones who are coming from a hardline religious perspective. At a certain point, it's, you know, it really is abusing the privilege of public office to violate the bodily autonomy and the reproductive decisions that your constituents have the right to make, and oftentimes because of that individual lawmaker's religious ideology and belief. So we have a long way to go, but I feel like that, you know, to one of Tori's earliest questions about how we express our secular identity, at the end of the day, like if people want to make their own choices in the privacy of their homes, that's their business. But I believe that we should live in a society where your freedom stops the moment that you are imposing your ideology and beliefs onto my body and onto my day-to-day decisions. And for women, you know, we've been working overtime because of that.
So I'm gonna do, there he goes. I could touch on two issues that aren't necessarily like you would think, you know, secular issues. So like really quickly, the environment. I mean, it's just right there in our state motto. I mean, it literally says Deatat Deus, like God enriches. I mean, so it's this idea that, you know, like we just got to go out there and till the soil and God will provide. And so we just have this warped view on the environment and how it's just there for us to use with no regard for, you know, like sustainability or what we, you know, the ramifications for how we're just pulling out resources left and right. And then the last one I would touch on that I hate running up to, this one all the time really, is this idea with like social services. The conservatives that I'm up against, that I'm you know trying to talk to and trying to get them to vote with me, they honestly believe that we're gonna ruin people morally if we help them with any kind of social services, whether it's food stamps, whether it's child, you know, healthcare for kids. They think that the kids are better off without that food and healthcare because they're worried about their souls. They're worried about them becoming, dependent on the state. And so it's really, you wouldn't think that's what I would be up against, that I'd have to be talking about money or something like that in terms of, food stamps for poor kids, but they see it as they think they're protecting them by keeping these services away from them.
All right, I have one last question that is very much a call to action question to close us out. We have a question from Joel who said, how do you recommend we get into secular political activism, especially in areas that are very adversarial towards secularism and non-religious individuals?
Say, like, how do they just get involved? That's the question.
I guess what I would rephrase is what is your call to action for all the folks who joined us tonight who are very passionate about supporting separation of religion and government and seeing more elected officials like yourselves who are openly secular? How would you tell them to get involved and to put their time and effort?
I love telling people that they should run for office. I mean, if you're not going to run for office yourself, then talk one of your friends into doing it. And you don't have to live in the most perfect district. Like you shouldn't wait for when your community is going to accept you. You have to make them accept you, and they're not going to do that if you're not putting yourself out there. If we're not putting our values out there. So if you can't run for office, then just help us talk about why more atheists should be in office, or why you don't have to believe in God to be good or to be worthy of public office. I always need help doing that.
I love running for office. I think that's huge. My first term in the legislature, I was the only openly atheist female legislator in the country. But thank goodness, a woman named Megan Hunt ran in Nebraska, and now I'm not the only one. I mean, it feels really good. Carolyn mentioned this, when you meet someone who's like you and you're not used to having the privilege of occupying these spaces, like it really does get exciting. But I, not only from being an openly atheist, being one of 38% of our legislature is female. I'm the only Palestinian American elected official in the state of Arizona, potentially in our state's history. And the reason I bring up these other identities and these other parts of my life is because when I am sitting around the table deliberating topics that disproportionately impact a community that I come from, I know that I'm not only bringing, your just dry data and facts and kind of more of those academic-y types of analysis, but I'm bringing the firsthand experiences and feelings of what it's like to actually spend every single day as that person with that background. And it really does change the conversation in a lot of ways. So consider running for office, but also it is an election year. And, I talked at the beginning about how vote by mail traditionally hasn't been a partisan issue, but the president has made it a partisan issue this year, this election cycle, because, the organized religious right and the National Republican Party realized that if more people vote, it could potentially, right? But you look at the facts and data, and vote by mail doesn't benefit one party over the other, but there's a fear on their side that it could potentially hold them accountable and they could lose their power and control. And so regardless of what party you're affiliated with, regardless of your political ideology, when you choose not to vote, that is a vote. Not casting a ballot means that whoever is running for whatever offices from federal to local level, whose values are less aligned than what you would prefer, you are essentially superseding your voice to that candidate, the one that is less preferable than the one who may very closely align with your values. I follow AOC on Twitter, and I'm like, dang, agree, you know, but then sometimes there's other Democrats who I don't really agree on a whole host of issues with, but they're still more closely aligned with how I would like to see our nation governed than the other choice, than the alternative. So please vote, but also consider getting involved in this election cycle by helping at any level of campaign, school board, state legislature, city council, Congress, presidential election. There are so many opportunities for people to help contact other voters and turn out the vote. And if you can't volunteer, then donate to a candidate who really speaks to your values, and better yet, when you donate to them or when you volunteer on their campaign, constantly be reminding them that your values are secular, that you are an atheist or humanist or agnostic, because that really does matter. Like, I remember the people who volunteer for me. I remember the people who donate to me. I remember the people who show up to the Capitol time in and time out, day in and day out, right? Like, and knowing more about their background, really, I carry that with me as I govern at the state legislature. So be proud of who you are, because in this country, you know, we should be able to be our full authentic selves. And you know, I'm just thank you for the thoughtful question, and thank you everyone for the really good conversation.
Is there time for me to add to that? Because
yes, please.
Okay. Because it sounds like this particular, I think you said his name was Joel, but sorry if I got it wrong. Sounds like he's coming from an area maybe similar to where I am. It's definitely, if you can, first get involved, because part of the problem is we have to, I think, normalize the idea that being secular or atheist or just non-Christian is okay, and that you contribute to the community just as much as everybody else, and that you can get involved and with whichever political party or any group organization locally. Also for me, what helped, because I started on the activism side, joining the Secular Coalition and going to the Capitol, and not just because Tori asked me to say this, but because, no, she didn't ask me. But going up there, and we would get like carloads of people and make our state representatives and senator aware that not everyone believes like you do, and we, you know, it can start there, but if you do, normal people don't run for office, but if you have it in you to run for office, to add to that, I would say definitely do it, because and if it is an area like mine, it didn't come up a lot. I was waiting for someone to ask, and you know, sometimes I had like an atheist t-shirt on when I was knocking on doors, but it just never became a thing. They were more concerned about, at the city council level, they were more concerned about, how long have I lived here? Do I belong? Am I one of them? Like, it wasn't about whether or not I was secular, atheist, or Christian, or even sometimes it was about party, but very little. So that would be my advice to anyone wanting to get involved in an area like mine.
I'm gonna jump in. I have a different perspective on this. So when that question was asked, I thought of something that happened 3 years ago when I taught kindergarten, and there was a local church that every single year donated dolls to all the kindergarten girls and balls to all the kindergarten boys. And so that was a very subversive way for them to be active and push gender stereotypes. My questions to leadership that was supporting this was, well, why don't all the kids get dolls and balls? Or why don't they choose? Or why don't we give them puzzles instead of pushing, you know, these subversive gender stereotypes? So I think if you're looking for other ways to be active or to support your schools, you know, the schools cannot refuse your donations and your service. And if they do, it's considered discrimination. And things that churches do is that they support the local schools and then in turn say, hey, can you post our banner outside on your gate or on your fence? And then they advertise. And it's not illegal for schools to put up a church's banner. It is illegal, though, for them to put up a church's banner and so that I would say, you know, if you are driving around and you see a religious banner on a school, you know, and you want to do something, get involved, start supporting that school, and then call up Tori. Sorry, Tori, I'm just going to volunteer you, but call up someone and say, hey, can we get a hold of a banner here and advertise? Because you can. And so, you know, I would say you can go that route too. And it's important for our kids to see other organizations, to see secular organizations supporting their schools and to normalize atheism and secularism in their lives, because kids are going to recreate the environments that we've created for them now. And so that's another way that you could be active.
And Sarah, I just want to close out that question by letting everyone in Arizona know that Secular Coalition for Arizona has 21 member organizations across the state: Kingman, Sierra Vista, Tucson, Flagstaff, Prescott, Sedona, Mesa, and encourage everyone, if you want to get more involved in the secular community, to look at our website, secularaz.org, find an organization near you. We'd love to have you.
That's a great way to close it out. I was going to say, this is a great way to thank our sponsors, who are all great organizations to get involved with. So, you know, the Center for Free Thought Equality, Arizona Jews for Justice, Arizona Faith Network, and Secular Coalition for Arizona, Jews for Secular Democracy, and there are many, many more that support separation of religion and government. So I want to thank our sponsors for making this happen. Thank you to all the participants who tuned in today. And of course, most of all, thank you to our elected officials for joining us today and for all that you do in service to Arizonans. And with that, have a great evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.